Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm really looking forward to today's chat. We're going to be looking at a new book that's come out. It's called The Book of Murder. And I want to introduce everyone to Matt Murphy. Now, Matt is a former homicide prosecutor. He's also a current legal analyst for ABC News, and I believe he's got his own private practice, and we'll talk all about that in a minute. But this is a guy who spent more than 2 decades as a prosecutor in the Orange County District Attorney's Office. So that's Southern California. And his responsibility there was to do criminal cases, trying some of the most compelling murder cases that have ever happened in America. Now, you've seen this guy on 2020, Good Morning America, a host of other news programs, and it's a place where he comes on and offers his insight on murder cases that are happening all across the country. But one of the things I really like about Matt is the fact that he also is giving back in a little bit of a different way through volunteer work, helping survivors of sexual assault navigating the criminal justice system. So with that, let me just introduce you all to Matt. Matt, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, happy to be here, and thanks for the kind words. It's if you only knew how the sausage was made, as they say, behind the scenes. But thank you very much.
Well, no, and I spent much of my career, as you may know, I spent a law enforcement career, but after about 10 years or so in law enforcement and the streets, I went to the county attorney's office in our area, which is the same as a district attorney. And then I eventually went to the Utah Attorney General's office, where I served as chief of staff. So I've been hanging out with prosecutors my entire career. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. So I want to first start off with you kind of sharing with everyone a little bit about your background, and just talk quickly about where you went to law school, how long you've been prosecuting cases, and then why you made this decision to shift over and go into private practice, because that's a kind of an interesting point in any lawyer's career. They say, okay, I've done the public service thing long enough, I'm going to go do something a little different.
Yeah, so I'm a California kid, grew up here, went to UCSB for undergrad, my beloved alma mater, and spent four years plus surfing, living on the beach up there, and stumbled my way kind of into law school. I went to San Diego, and then I got end of my after my first year, I had 3 really compelling interviews. The FBI was making some pretty good pitches to me to join the FBI. I had a plaintiff's firm that that I really liked. Basically, they represent people in things like lawsuits against counties and organizations, and that was interesting. And then I got an interview with the Orange County DA's office, and I sort of stumbled into it in a way. And you start out doing, they send you to juvenile for a while, and you start doing some learning to talk in code, as they say. And then you do misdemeanor jury trials. Then you get into general felonies. It's called the felony panel, and it's all you do. You just do felony jury trials for a year, and then it's almost like an NFL draft. You get drafted to different vertical units, and Orange County is a little different than a lot of the other DA's offices across the United States. That they have this vertical unit concept where essentially you get assigned a patch of the county, so that the vertical units are things like major fraud, environmental crimes, gangs, sexual assault, and of course the big one is homicide. And you get you almost get recruited or drafted by the different unit heads to go into their unit, where you learn to essentially specialize in one kind of crime. And so I went into sexual assault. I did that for just shy of 4 years, prosecuting rapists and child molesters. And then from there, I sort of got a call. It's almost like the call to go to the bigs, as they say in baseball. and I got essentially brought in by a man who wound up being my mentor, a man named Lou Rosenblum, who was head of the unit back then, and he was a legendary prosecutor in his own right. And I was assigned the cities of Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Newport, and Irvine. And basically, the vertical part, the word comes from you start when the crime is committed. So I would get a call in the middle of the night. I handled all murders for those cities for 17 years. So if there was a murder in Irvine, I would roll out with my detective. You get your own investigator assigned to you. Then I'd meet the detectives from the Irvine Police Department and go to the scene, try to help them do warrants and things like that. And then, when there's enough evidence, you charge the defendant, take it to court, and you handle everything basically from the moment the case is filed, all sentencing, and that's how it works. So I attended about 100 murder scenes over the course of my career.
It's kind of an interesting evolution that we've gone through, because early in my career, which would have preceded yours by a few years, maybe decades, we didn't bring the prosecutor out on a homicide case, and we put the case together. We walked in and we said, okay, here it is. And you got to look at all the warts instead of maybe doing a little bit of course correction along the way. I think that's one of the phenomenal things that's happened as law enforcement and the criminal justice system have evolved over time. But I would suspect you probably were on the beginnings of that happening, even in Orange County, weren't you?
I think Orange County may be one of the first departments or agencies that started doing it that way. In California here, we live in crazy times. And I think that, I mean, having gone through that, I can't imagine prosecuting homicide cases any other way than having that being the model, because you're there on the ground that night and you have the opportunity to kind of steer things away from any legal mistakes that might be made. Like, you can ensure that the constitutional rights of the defendant are, scrupulously followed, and that if you've got somebody that is like a young detective who's very eager, who wants to run off in a direction that may cause problems with due process, that you get a handle on that right away. And so you're not directing the investigation as a prosecutor, but you're close enough to it with the idea that you can assist them in anything they need. You're learning the evidence as the investigation is going on in real time, sometimes even, monitoring interviews. I would attend pretty much every autopsy where cause of death was going to be an issue. And there's just there's no real substitute. I mean, as a DA, if there's an issue regarding cause of death and you're there and you actually watch the pathologist do their thing and watch the postmortem examination, by the time you stand up in front of a jury and explain it to them, you've witnessed it yourself, and you can videotape that sort of thing, and there's always photos, but there's no substitute for actually being there. And you just wind up more effective. You wind up a better lawyer. You wind up more, I think, a lot more persuasive in front of a jury and also in front of the judge, because you witnessed it from the very beginning. You weren't directing it, but you sure were close enough to hopefully avoid any errors.
The cool thing that you're saying there, that I think is really important too, that I hope people are picking up on, is that as a prosecutor, your job is to paint a picture for that jury of what that crime scene was like, what it felt like, what the smells were, what even the humidity outside was like, all of those things. And when you're in a position that you have to only rely upon photographs and the testimony of other people, and cops oftentimes are, especially patrol officers, are pretty much fundamental. They get down and they say they entered through an 18 by 24-inch window, but they don't talk about the fact that the window had scrapings of glass on it or other kinds of things that you get to visualize when you're there. So how did that help you tell a story and paint this picture in the jurist's mind by being there?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head in a way only a former police officer can. Probably the best example of that is I can tell you a story. There's a murder of a poor 7-Eleven clerk in Irvine, right? So we get it's like 2:30 in the morning or whatever, and it's these two just horrific individuals. They're skinheads, all the swastika tattoos, the whole deal. They go into this 7-Eleven, and they're all blacked out, and they've got masks on and the whole deal. And they're high on methamphetamine, and they one of them goes over to the counter and stabs the poor clerk right in the heart, and the other one comes at him with a Maglite flashlight. So and fractures his skull. So he is killed almost instantly. And then they're like, okay, give us the money. And and then they paw around at the register trying to open it. And they wind up leaving, getting nothing, right? And they dropped a bunch of stuff on their way out of the 7-Eleven parking lot, and they run off. And because skinheads aren't geniuses, and methamphetamine addicts are even dumber, and then you throw in white supremacists on top of it all, and so these guys were idiots. But it was one of the coldest nights of the entire year, and they got separated as they're running through this adjacent apartment complex, and one of them gets back to the car, and master criminal that he was, he drives off into the night, leaving his crime partner behind. And so what he decides to do is he's gonna change his appearance, right? Because it's a 7-Eleven, and even these guys know that there's gonna be video pretty soon. So he strips down, and he's wearing shorts and a t-shirt. So he gets rid of his jacket, and he gets rid of his pants. And it's a funny thing, because I get called out, and I was going to park on the street originally, and decided I'd park in a back part of the lot instead. So I actually stopped my car there for a bit, and then I went into the lot. Well, this guy was hiding in the bushes, probably 60 feet away from where I was about to park my car, and he's just murdered somebody. And anyway, the canine finds him in 30 seconds flat. And so basically, I'm waiting in the parking lot, and even though it's a 7-Eleven, even though these guys have no way that they have any reasonable expectation of privacy, we still want to make sure we're crossing every T. So I'm waiting for a search warrant that I just reviewed to come back from the night judge, right? So we're in the parking lot, and it had to be the coldest night. It was in February. It had to be the coldest night of the entire year. And I am just freezing, and I kept having to get back in my car. And then it was almost comical, because this is before Irvine had they went up buying this really nice command trailer with like heat and a kitchen and all this stuff that they would bring to their homicide scenes. This is before they bought that thing. So we're all taking shifts inside our cars with our heaters, and it was freezing. And then they catch him, and his first thing is they're like, well, because that's more than a little suspicious. A guy with swastika tattoos in the bushes at 3 a.m. wearing a t-shirt on the coldest night of the year. And his story was, I was at a party at a friend's, and I don't know exactly where, and I was just walking there. It's the dumbest story ever. But the fact that I was there, it's like, ladies and gentlemen, nobody in all of Southern California was wearing shorts and a t-shirt that night. And that's not something that necessarily makes its way into a police report, and the police in Irvine are excellent, and they're great detectives. But that little detail, when that went to trial, and that wound up being a component of the trial. And the fact that, that I was there shivering in the cold, I was really able to drive that home. And, I think every trial I did where I attended a scene, I saw or smelled or observed something that, would have been properly documented by my detectives, but it was just, it actually being there and being able to explain that to the jury. Now, they don't know that you're there as a prosecutor, but really being able to bring it home and emphasize certain points. And I never lost a case on any murder case that I ever attended the scene on. So,
congratulations! That's fantastic, and what a great thing for the families who end up being the collateral surviving damage in these kinds of cases. You said something that just brought me this incredible flashback about the importance of being able to paint a picture. You talked to that jury about how cold it was, how you felt that way. And I remember one particular night where I had, I don't know, months or a year earlier, been on a really violent homicide scene where there was so much blood. I actually had this mental imprint of the iron taste in my mouth from the blood in the air. And I remember walking into a home months or a year later and tasting that iron in my mouth. And it's what gave me what I needed from an exigent standpoint to go and kick a door and move in. And it ended up being a suicide case, but not even being in the same room and visualizing blood, I knew there was a massive amount of blood on, because I had this trigger that I could then, I guess, verbalize in front of a jury. And of course, I never had to in that case. But I just love that imagery that you're giving me there.
And another part about that, which is, you're suffering a little bit, and it's a part of the job, and I loved it. As twisted as that may sound, I still miss it every day. But when you're there and you're cold and you're shivering and you're waiting and you're hungry and you're sleep deprived, when you're the detective who's standing next to you is you're in that foxhole together. And when, a week later, when you suggest to that same guy that you were shivering in the cold with, hey, maybe we want to interview this witness, or maybe it's a good idea to do this, they're with you. They listen to you because you're right there with them. And most of the time, especially after you do it for a while and you do a couple of cases with those guys, you develop a rapport, also, it really impresses the enormity of the responsibility on you as a prosecutor. I had another one also in Irvine where a woman had been murdered, and it was Thanksgiving. And we go in, and I actually talk about this in the book, at least part of it in the book, where she's been stabbed in the back with a screwdriver, but she was preparing Thanksgiving dinner, and she was listening to a disco CD that was on repeat. And of course, you don't touch anything. And by the time we got the warrant to enter the home, it's just this surreal scene with this poor woman with the screwdriver on his back, with the happiest music imaginable. And but then her daughter came home in the middle of that, and I was there when they had to do the notification to the daughter, and you see the grief that families experience with that, and that really brings it home as a DA. And I learned very quickly that I would always sit down with the families and give them my personal phone number and kind of give them a breakdown on the criminal justice system, the different hearings we could expect, the different arguments, and I think it helped them a lot as I just wanted them to know that there were people that cared. And I had a wonderful team working with me in the DA's office. I had a paralegal named Dina Basham, who was my minder, who's one of my closest friends, who, and I had great detectives, OCDA investigators, which he used to be one, and they were wonderful to us. So I had a series of just the best of the best. So I'd sit down with my team and the family and walk the family through it. And you've experienced this, of course, and you're talking about apoplectic grief by a mother or a sister or some poor family member that's going through that. And I always thought it was really important for them to know that the prosecutor was there and went to the autopsy and understood it. Like, the enormity of it never had to be explained to me because I was there from the very beginning.
I wanted to kind of maybe launch off of that and ask you a couple of questions that have to do with the decision of when to release information to the public and how to release information to the public, because there is incredible pressure on investigators at the scene to take care of a case. But then you have this collateral noise that's happening with the media showing up outside, trying to get a commander to release the right amount of information and get that information out into the public. But then this kind of overwhelming sense of the prosecution to get that information out. We're starting to see more and more of this happening where, because of the demands of social media, I believe, and the fact that you got to be a little bit ahead of all of the misinformation that comes from the true crime community and people that want to be the first to reveal something. How do you find that balance as a prosecutor at the scene with your team, and that includes the investigators, to determine how much and when to release information to the public?
Yeah, so in California, there's even an additional layer to that, and that is there's an ethical consideration for a prosecutor releasing too much information, because you run the risk of getting an accusation of attempting to poison the venire, the jury pool, especially in smaller counties. In fact, we just saw a big motion in out there in Idaho on the Koberger case, where there's a change of venue motion pending, which I'll be surprised if it's granted, but that's a smaller county. based on exactly that, pretrial publicity and media. And that really is a difficult balance to achieve. There's usually a PIO or a public information officer with each police department, and you have to coordinate with them to make sure that the public has the right to know certain things like the name of an arrestee, what the charges are when they're filed, but you have to be very, very careful about how much else your office provides to the press. And most reporters, in my experience, are professionals who don't want to screw anything up. They really are. The reporters I dealt with tended to be smart, highly educated, and sort of understood where some of the lines were as far as information. But you always have to be so cognizant of, the rights of the defendant as you go through that, because you don't want to bias the jury pool. So it's a tough balancing act. True crime is a little bit like you've got like your local TV, your local reporters, and you get relationships going with them very, very quickly. And I never really had any problems with them. But the true crime world, most people, again, want to get it right. They want to do it. Most people, I think, are good. But you definitely have a few out there that you see some stuff that's not right. In fact, Koberger's a good example. There were some online sleuths that decided that there was a professor who did that, who's totally innocent. And there's another one, this Karen Reed case outside of Boston right now, where there's a local podcaster named Turtle Boy who he had people protesting out in front of the homes of witnesses because the defense attorney, who's a friend of mine, Alan Jackson, advanced a theory at one point that maybe they killed him inside the house. And you had this kind of loony guy who had this big conspiracy theory that he ran with, not Alan, but this just dude out there in the community. And he got a following, and that he wound up doing time for criminal contempt because he refused to obey the court's order that was trying to get a handle on that.
I think he's actually facing some additional challenges that he's got to get through, but I think you're right. And I guess the thing that's so distressing about that, we saw it just in the last couple of days with the Carol Welsh, the gymnast who was murdered at the university in Wisconsin. And there's this fine line between getting information out to satisfy the public, to instill a sense of security in the public, but to still protect the case. And in the Welsh case, they announced who the victim was. They announced where the arrest or the murder occurred. Then they fail to announce who the suspect is that they've arrested, and they allow it to go for 3 days over the weekend for this 23-year-old man, which to me that was a real indicator of why there should be question, but not telling people who was arrested in the case, just allowing that to sit and brew until today when that person was arraigned. And I guess the question I have for you is there value in getting information out so that you're ahead of all of the conspiracy theories that seem to germinate when we don't tell what we know?
Well, I sure think so. But it really is, it's an evolving thing. True crime is still a very growing area, and social media, we're still in the infancy of it. It doesn't feel like that, but I think we are. And I bet you're the same. Okay, even though I'm far more familiar as an attorney and having had 32 years of doing this with the weak spots in the system, and the frustrations that come about. And I got a case right now where I'm defending a police officer in my private practice. We had a day on Friday that, man, it was just one of those that you just want to throw your hands up. But the longer you do this, I really have become a believer in the wisdom of the law, as strange as that might sound. There are two kinds of models for criminal law around the world. One is the civil model. That's the Napoleonic codes, and that's the majority of these things. It's basically laws that are written by people in a legislature, and then there's the judges that will oversee cases, and there's no juries typically in those. The United States based a system on a thing called stare decisis, which is, I think, far superior because you have good old fashioned common sense is the bedrock of it, and that's why we have juries. But also we base our laws on decisions that have been made by judges over hundreds of years. So that only the wisest and the most just and the best ideas have survived that time. And one of those things in the United States is the presumption of innocence. I am a huge believer in that. And when it comes to, in the courtroom, you're presumed innocent, but there's no such thing in the world of social media. So when you've got like that poor professor in Idaho, like all of those very wise decisions over hundreds of years where people recognize, where judges, wise, smart people recognize that, sometimes it isn't what it appears. And sometimes we do get the wrong person, charged, and hopefully that gets corrected through the system. And the vast majority of the time it does, I believe. But, there's reasons for that. And in social media, all you need is somebody with a crazy conspiracy theory and somebody's reputation is ruined and it lives forever online, and that's definitely a feature of the modern landscape that we live in.
I wonder what your thoughts are on another angle that has to do with the criminal justice system, especially the trial phase of the criminal justice system that's been kind of on my mind pretty heavily lately. And that is because of, for instance, the Karen Reed case or what's happening in Richard Allen, the Delphi killer, and the defense either introducing or allowing to continue the conspiracy theories that have no factual information to really support them, but it creates this tidal wave of anger and tribalism where facts no longer matter. The only thing that matters is which side you've chosen. What are your thoughts there?
Um, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think that you and I have gone through very similar evolutions on that, and that's the kind of stuff, frankly, that makes me want to take a very long surf trip and go scuba diving. And that's it. It's so frustrating, and it's just you especially in the time of social media. And that's like I'm dealing with that right now on that case I just mentioned with the police officer. And you know, uh, every once in a while you have somebody who's actually innocent. And when you see that and you see negative media, that you talk about tribalism, and it's almost like we're so divided right now as a country that it's almost like people have decided to surrender their common sense and they're just going to believe whatever their side says, and then you've got agenda driven, points of view on things that may be absolutely disconnected from reality. And you can't fix past injustices by creating new ones. And when you've got people that are willing to believe just because of the demographics of a defendant or something like that, it is, in my view, it is antithetical to everything that America stands for. It really is. There's a great movie, if you haven't seen it yet. It's John Adams, and it was an HBO special, and it's played by Paul Giamatti. He plays John Adams, and he is just a fantastic actor. But there's a scene there where there's a bunch of young British troops, and he's talking about the Boston Massacre. And he is one of the founding fathers, and the man was a genius, and as I believe a lot of the founding fathers truly were. And he decides that he's going to defend these young British soldiers. And basically what happened was there was a crowd that approached them and they started throwing things at them. And these young guys that were all like 18, 19 years old, they panicked and they fired into the crowd. And John Adams decided that they, of all people, needed a fair trial, and he defended them. And even though it went against the grain, it went against the populist thing, went against the trend of the day, which was everybody hated the British, but it was about fairness, and it was about fairness to those individual young men who made a horrible mistake. But you got a lynch mob on one side because they're redcoats and who cares about anything else, and you have one of our founding fathers. It was in he defended these young men, and that's the way it's supposed to work. And we see so many people in our country are eagerly running away from that as a concept right now. And there is no ends justify
Yeah.
the means either. That's not a philosophy that was rejected 2,000 years ago by the ancient Greeks. The ends don't justify the means morally, and they never have. And the idea that you can, throw up a couple sacrificial lambs and make a point is everything this country stands against. And so I don't know. I don't know if that's too much of a tangent or a rant, but
No, I really appreciate that because I feel like that's part of the villainization that's going on with law enforcement. And we both know there are a few bad cops here and there, and nobody hates bad cops worse than good cops and good prosecutors. And I feel like we have lost sight of fact based on our anger and our frustration. But maybe you could offer a ray of hope through that jury selection process, because one anarchist on a jury could get someone off from a murder charge. And that's what you spent your career doing. How do you go through a process where you try to vet hundreds of potential jurors as you whittle them down to the 12 or 18 that are actually going to make a decision for you?
So my very first DUI trial, this is back in 1996. It was a guy named Mike Haran, he was a former police officer. He was a DA for a while, then he became a criminal defense lawyer, and just a prince of a guy. He wound up passing away a few years ago, but he was just a great guy and a phenomenal lawyer. And so I'm doing voir dire, which is jury selection, right? In French, it means to tell the truth. And I don't know what I'm doing. It's my third jury trial. I look like I'm 12 years old. It is, and I kind of stumbled through that, my jury selection, and he coached me through this trial, and he destroyed me, by the way. I lost my first DUI, and I lost my first bar fight about 2 weeks later. I haven't lost one since. But Mike Haran coached me through that, and he said, when it comes to jury selection, it's really hard because it's the only time you're actually put on a timer. Oftentimes, you have the most that you've got to try to find out if they're fair. You want to make a good impression on them. You want the judge. You get it's the hardest thing. This is as he's explaining it. He goes, after you do enough of them, he goes, then you're going to get kind of good at it. And you're going to want to show off. And he goes, you want to tell your jokes and get the laughs. And then he goes, and you'll reach a point in your career where all you want to do is hear what they have to say. And I thought, it was so prophetic. And at the end of the day, when you try enough cases, I tried 133 jury trials, and you reach that point in your career where really what you're looking for is somebody who will follow the law and be fair. And you want that as a prosecutor, just like you do a defense lawyer. You want people that are going to listen, that aren't going to run off. And my buddy Bruce Moore, who's really smart, he's a few years ahead of me in the office. He also gave me some tips on voir dire, and he said, what you're looking for is the cry of the loon. Look for the loon that's going to screw everything up. Look for the person who is going to want to do things their way. And, and that's another thing about America today, is that you've got a lot of jurors who think they want to be able to go back and tell their friends what they did, rather than follow the law and do what the judge tells them to do, which is the way it's supposed to work. And in my experience, 99 times out of 100, when you get a conscientious group of jurors who want to follow the law in front of a good judge, that jury is going to make the right call. Sometimes that's an acquittal. Sometimes that's a conviction. And if you got a prosecutor who's doing their job right, that should always be a conviction. But you've got, the system, when it's followed correctly, really does work. But there's so much cynicism out there that a lot of jurors think they're smarter than the founding fathers, or they're smarter than the judge, or they're smarter than the law that is not just a bunch of elected officials writing it like in civil law countries. These are legal concepts that have existed for hundreds of years in our system. And people will come in and they would have seen something on, some channel that they feel they need to conform to. And that really goes both ways. There are cases where people are charged incorrectly, and I'm in the middle of one right now. And we need that independent thought, and that comes along with following the law. Our law encourages the exercise of common sense, but not the advancement of an agenda one way or the other. So it's hard, and it can be maddening. And I think for law enforcement right now, it's getting harder and harder these days, and law enforcement really has been under an assault. Just one more point on that. When an accountant runs off with somebody's money, we don't all excoriate all accountants. Or when a dentist does a really bad job in Idaho or someplace, we don't hate all dentists. But sure enough, when a police officer makes a mistake and somebody tragically loses their life, all of a sudden all cops are getting stuff thrown at them. And I've never understood that. It's like, it's almost like, it's a mob mentality a lot of times that is fundamentally unfair, and then those people, if they wind up as jurors, God forbid, if they get a police officer, they're the last ones who are ever going to be fair. And the irony is, they profess to want fairness for people. And then when that person is a police officer who's in the hot seat, all of a sudden fairness doesn't matter anymore, and presumption of innocence doesn't matter anymore. And it's really hard on the women and men in law enforcement right now, and they need our support. And that's why a growing part of my practice, I've wound up defending cops, and they need it. And I'm proud of that, even though it is often against the grain. And it might not be a popular thing to say, but I'll say this: I'm going to keep doing it, no matter who likes it or not, and I will be there to the bitter end with the clients that I currently have. So.
Thank you, because it is a job that not many people, unless they have been there, would ever understand, where you have fractions of seconds to make decisions, and all you can rely on is your what you're perceiving at that moment and your training when those things go down the tube. And it is a terribly difficult thing. I want to talk a little bit about the book you've got coming out. And I wanted to just, maybe while I leave this up here for a moment, have you kind of describe what it was, this evolution that said, hey, you know what, now's the time to write a book. And here are some stories that I think people would be really interested in.
So yeah, I left the office in 2019. We had an election in Orange County, and I'd been in the unit for 17 years at that point. And the longest record holder of the homicide unit before that was my old boss, Rick King. He spent 15 years, but he did half of that as a manager. So I was a line prosecutor, meaning I had about anywhere from a dozen to 2 dozen or so murders on my caseload, and one trial after another. And it's kind of, I loved it. I still miss it every day, but it takes a bit of a toll. And, I never got married. I never had any kids. And it was time for me to go on to the next chapter. But I missed it. And, when all you do are murders for 17 years, you see, the everything from the baby deaths to domestic violence murders to gang murders, to intricate plots to kill for money, to serial killers. And it's so fascinating, for lack of a better term. So I had all these great stories, and I really thought I thought they were worth sharing. And a lot of that is, I wanted to recognize some of the behind the scenes people, like the crime lab personnel that are toiling away at 3 o'clock in the morning with us, that, don't get their due. And some of the people behind the scenes. And also, sort of tell people a little bit about how murder actually works. We've all heard the term first degree murder versus second degree murder versus manslaughter. I figured I would try to explain that in an entertaining way, or at least as entertaining as I could make it. Kind of the way I would explain it to juries. So I use the same examples, and then I walk everybody through about a dozen good murder cases that I did, one after another sequentially. And I sort of interweave some personal stuff in there too. What led me to it, a little bit about my childhood, some of the relationships that I had, and how that impacted my job, and how the job impacted the relationships, and sort of humanize it a bit. And really, I thought it would be a fun book to write. And Disney Books liked it. And so with Hyperion and Avenue, I got a great partner, and a guy named Adam Wilson, who's the editor there, and as well as a wonderful writer slash editor named Jeremy Blackman, who I got teamed up with, that helped me structure and organize everything. And so it's kind of cool because I left a team, that I loved in the DA's office, and I'm a part of a couple of new teams now. ABC News, who treated me great, and also these guys with Disney Books. So I think that it's I hope it's a positive, read for people. It's about sort of not giving up, and how the good guys can still win a few. And in this one, we won, a bunch. So I thought it was a great opportunity to give some people their due, educate the public a little bit, and sort of scratch the itch of wanting to tell all these crazy stories that I picked up from 21 years of sexual assault and homicide. And this is basically a book about homicide.
So folks, the QR code is on the screen. You can go right to that QR code by holding your phone up and capturing it, or you can go to the links down below to pick up Matt's book, The Book of Murder. This is a perfect time to get it because you're on the front end of it. But Matt, I think one thing that I would like to kind of maybe, I don't know, I guess expose you a little bit is when you think about writing a book, and I've had the opportunity to write a number of books, what personally was the most challenging chapter for you, and what was it that won't be revealed in the book that made that so challenging?
Boy, yeah, I think the toughest part for me on that was, I start out talking about somebody that I almost got married to, and then she wound up getting married to a great guy that is father of her kids, and they're still married to this day. But it kind of starts with that was going on in my mind right when I got promoted to homicide. So I walked the reader through that and sort of the trials and tribulations. But then I got into, I was with somebody I had a long-term relationship with a wonderful person that didn't work out, and that was trying to figure out what, if anything, to write about that. And I decided that out of respect for her, I would just leave that completely out. So, it was the interpersonal stuff, and I kept a journal through most of my time. So a lot of this is my interpersonal thoughts. Going through these dusty old journals from 2 decades ago, like what goes through your mind when you're watching the autopsy of a beautiful 22-year-old woman. Like what. My thoughts, and I decided to share some of those interpersonal things with the reader. And then also, I talked a little bit about my family, and a lot of my colleagues, and I think you probably had this experience. There's a great quote by Carl Jung, a famous psychologist, who talks about wisdom of those who have been in the dark. And he talks about how those that have been and not to get too philosophical here, but there's a great Marcus Aurelius quote. A person can have an easy life or a strong character, and you can't have both, And so I wound up our unit was essentially a bunch of mutants, very talented lawyers who had all turned down much more lucrative opportunities to make money. By the time you get to the homicide unit, Orange County has 3 million people, roughly the population, and there's only 8 or 9 homicide prosecutors. So it's a very, very sort of elite group. And when I got there, a lot of these guys were former military, and my colleagues were so impressive. They're pretty intimidating to me, to be honest. And so I talk about that a little bit in the book about how these guys had all had pretty big struggles in their lives that brought them to the same place that I arrived at. And I relatively had it much easier than most of my colleagues did. But I talk about a few of the rough spots I had as a kid. And it, one of the murders was Rodney Alcala, also known as the dating game killer, who was a monster in every way. And the main Orange County victim was a little girl named Robin Samso, who was 12 years old in the summer of 1979. And we were the same age. And they made the case based on her. Back then, Vans skateboarding shoes were all the rage in Southern California, and we used to personalize them. And I had Vans tennis shoes, and that's how we identified her body originally back in 1979, as they found this shoe, because he dumped her. She'd been scavenged in the chaparral of Southern California, which means the animals got to her before the police did. but that shoe with her name on it was so distinct that and it was an interesting parallel for me, because here I was decades later prosecuting the man that killed her, even though we were the same age, and I was on the beach in Santa Monica that same day because I spent every day that summer on the beach, and you can tell by all the sun damage on my face. I've got the sun damage to prove it, but yeah. So there was, I share some personal things that it was challenging to go through that. Sorry for the long answer on that, but it's, I share that with the reader in the book, at least a little bit, and hopefully it fits and it makes sense to people. It made sense when I was writing it.
Well, I am so grateful that our friends at CrimeCon reached out and suggested that we chat about this, and that's a great venue to help the true crime enthusiasts kind of understand these things. But I guess as part of this legacy that I think is so important that you are leaving behind, it's the volunteer work that you're doing. And then I guess I'd like you to kind of wrap with how you're giving back to that young prosecutor that's filling your shoes today, now that you're in private practice, but still obviously in an influential position.
So I wound up right after I left. I wound up getting involved in some cases where victims of sexual assault brought me in and as what's called a Marsy's Law lawyer. In California, we have a law called Marsy's Law, which is the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. It's Article 1, Section 28 of the California Constitution, where essentially they have the right to have an attorney go in and fight for them to the degree that we can. And it's limited because you're not a party. But I started doing some Marsy's Law work, and it wound up, taking up a very significant part of my practice for my first couple of years. And it's kind of funny. My sister, when I was going in for my very first client interview, very first person to contact me was a survivor of sexual assault. And I was going in, and my sister's also an attorney. So I'm sitting down for my first client interview as a lawyer. And she called me and she goes, listen, before you do this, I need you to remember you're in business now. You're a businessman. You need to make money. This is what you're doing. You're now a man of commerce. Like you've done, you did your stint trying to save the world, and now, try to, put some money away for retirement and do right by yourself. This is her big speech to me. And so I have the meeting with this woman, and I really like her. And I'm leaving the meeting, and my sister calls me again, and she goes, "Okay, so let me tell you how it went." And the first conversation, I'm like, "Of course, I get it. I know. I'm in business. And she goes, "Okay, let me tell you how it went." She cried. She had no money, and you agreed to represent her anyway. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And it's like, yes, but let me explain why. So anyway, that thing, little did I know that case wound up being a gigantic part of my life for the next couple of years. And I, sometimes I think that, and I think a lot of your listeners and the people who follow you will understand on this. Sometimes the most important thing, it's less about the end result as it is just sometimes you just got to fight. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight for the right thing, regardless of what happens in the end. And for me, victims of sexual assault need people fighting for them. And sometimes, like in that case, the prosecutors weren't doing that. And I went in as hard as I could on behalf of, wound up being 5 women that I represented in that case, and doing everything I could to fight back a little bit. And, it's tough. It's a little quixotic, like Don Quixote going after those windmills. Like sometimes the intentions are good and you can expend a lot of energy, and maybe it doesn't wind up where you want, but at least all of those women can look back and know that they had a champion doing their best, As far as the young prosecutors, it's an interesting thing because when I left, the people who took over my caseload were very close friends of mine. It was a bunch of people. And so I did everything I could to kind of walk them through the cases. And I still have a couple that are going down there. I left 5 years ago. In fact, gosh, 5 years ago, 5 years ago on the 29th of August, I hadn't even thought about that. So almost exactly 5 years ago. So There's a couple of my cases are still there, and I do my best to kind of walk them through what our theories were, the way I was going to present it. And I had a fantastic run in that unit. I had great people supporting me, but I tried 52 cases, and knock wood, we convicted everybody, and we convicted them of what we charged them for, almost. Had a couple lessers in there, and had a hung jury or two, but we came back with every single one of them, and eventually everybody went to state prison. But
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
so I've done everything I can to sort of make myself available for the phone calls, and I still get a few. And then one of my best friends in the whole world is now the head of the unit, the homicide unit. I love him to death. He's one of the best people I know. So they're still trying, but elections have consequences, and we're seeing some crazy things out here in California from our legislature that hopefully people like. We've got a big election coming up. Our DA here in Los Angeles County is a man named George Gascon, who is very zealous advocate, really wanting to prosecute crimes to the greatest degree he can, as long as the defendant is a police officer, and everybody else not so much. So we've got an election coming up for any of your followers. If they live in Los Angeles County, it's critical. He's got a challenger named Nathan Hochman that will, I think, be a huge step back towards public safety sanity, which we do not have in LA County right now. So
I am so grateful for the chance I've had to visit with Matt Murphy. This is a former homicide prosecutor of 20 years. So this is a guy who prosecuted more than 100 homicides in Orange County. That's the Southern California region. He's now an analyst for ABC News. You'll see him on many, many shows, and I hope you'll check him out. But most importantly, I hope you'll check out his book, which I'm going to put on the screen here again, The Book of Murder. And I'm also going to put up this QR code where you can go and you can get his book and watch for him. And for me at CrimeCon, we'll be chatting. Maybe we'll do a panel together this year, Matt, and have some fun talking about some of these criminal cases. But I just want you to know how much I appreciate the impact that you've made. And as one of those cops that would have worked alongside of you, I can tell you how much it meant to those investigators that you served alongside, as well as I'm sure the experience you had with them. So thank you for being with us. And I'm going to give you just a minute to wrap up any final thoughts you have, and then I'm going to say a couple of things as we close out.
Well, thank you so much, and I would love to do a panel at CrimeCon. CrimeCon's a lot of fun every year, and I'd encourage anybody that can go. I think it's a very good experience, and they do a great job. Yeah, the book was really it was a labor of love for me, and I'll share one last final quick story. I was out to dinner in New York, where I've got a place now where I'm trying to do this media stuff and with ABC and all the rest of it, and this is right at the beginning of the book, and I was talking about the first couple of conversations I had with the editor. Like, are we gonna, is this going to be just straight law and factual stuff, or should I include some of these personal things from my journals? And this woman that I was with, she kind of waved her hand and said, "Nobody's going to be interested in your personal musings," and it really kind of hurt my feelings. So I resolved that night as I was walking back to my place to quadruple the amount of personal musings. So a lot of this is my thoughts on these things, and and I take no position on politics. It's a safe read on all that, but it is it's a personal journey, just like it says, prosecutor's journey through love and death, and that's really what it was. So I really hope people like it. I've got my a few people have read it, and I've gotten good feedback, but a lot of that feedback comes from like my paralegal, and I pay her, so she has to lie to me if she didn't like it. So I really hope people like it. It came from the heart.
Well, let me tell you, anybody can write a textbook, but I think a memoir that is well written, that explores and teaches and leaves the reader with something of value at the end is a piece of art. And we'll have to swap books and make this part of what we do at CrimeCon. But thank you so much. And folks, make sure that you're checking in the links down below how to get over and order this new book by Matt Murphy. You're not going to want to miss it. The Book of Murder. I think you're going to enjoy it. You can support him. And the links to his website are also down there where you can maybe send him a note and thank him. And I hope that you'll continue to look for Profiling Evil on Facebook and Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And by all means, if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're subscribing to Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And remember that Profiling Evil website where you can go in, and Matt, this is something you might want to do. We have a brand new map that we've put up that today has about 25,000 unsolved murders and missing person cases, but we're building it as a crowdsourced intelligence. I call it CSI mapping, where people can enter their own cases that they feel like they need some help on trying to find somebody. And I have a little process where we authenticate and get rid of the cuss words and any pictures that are inappropriate for the web. But we give families a place to get on and talk about the victimology, to tell you a little bit about these special people who have died. And I'll tell you, it's pretty darn compelling. So, folks, I hope you'll go there and check that out. And from all of us at Profiling Evil, and Matt, thank you again. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.